Awesome. All right. Well, without further ado, while you, Brett, are getting things set up on your end, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. I just want to say good evening to everybody, and thank you for joining us for our second official Trout Routes Masterclass. Thank you, Brett from ReWild Outdoors, for joining us tonight and taking the time. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. But before we start, I just wanted to do some housekeeping real quick. I want to make sure that everybody makes sure to keep an eye out in their email inbox when we get off the class tonight. We actually just sent out a really awesome email blast going over our new expanded data imports. So instead of just being able to import your GeoJSON files in those Google places, you can now import GPX and KML files, which means you can import Garmin data, OnX data, AllTrails data, some really awesome data that can make your maps even more useful for you. So definitely check out that email blast, kind of runs you through how to do all those data transfers and everything like that. So, all right, for tonight, I'm gonna kick it over to Brett here momentarily, and he will take things over, but feel free to leave any questions that may come up or anything down below, and Brett and I will kind of rejoin at the end here and go over a little quick Q&A session and before we end the night. So without any further ado, Brett, take it away.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate everybody who's popping in on this. This is my first time running a masterclass for Trout Routes, so I appreciate Matt and Eric for setting me up with this. This is kind of, I don't know, this is kind of personal, kind of professional, kind of a little blend of both worlds about, me being a dad, as a young father trying to take kids fishing, and then realizing what it means to take kids fishing as my kids are older. My kids are now 11, soon to be 12 and 14. So fishing with them has changed quite a bit over the years, but fishing for myself has also changed quite a bit over the years. I whipped up a little presentation for a little background here. Just a little bit about myself. I kind of already hinted at that I have two boys. So I'm a husband, a father. What else am I? I'm a history teacher. I do all sorts of things outdoors. I hunt, I fish, I hike, I camp. I do a lot of mountain biking, which is one of my favorite things to do. And one of the hardest things that now that my kids are just about teenagers, obviously, one of them is, but one's on the cusp there, getting them to do things outdoors is a little tough these days. And I'll get into why in a few minutes here. I grew up fishing. I live in eastern Pennsylvania. I call it the busy side of the state. I have a class 1 trout stream. If you are on the Trout Routes app there. I didn't know what classification ever it was until I got Trout Routes Pro, which thanks guys for hooking me up with that. It's fantastic. So I live 5 minutes from class 1 water, which I knew was good fishing because I lived here my whole life and fished the Bushkill Creek. And I just didn't realize like some of the access points, which I'll talk about, because like even being a local, there are some sections of this creek that are posted that I didn't realize were actually public, which is like mind-blowing to me. But we'll get to that. I started fly fishing probably, it says 2015 on there. I think I started like 2013 or 2014. That's when I was given a rod, but I didn't really know what the heck I was doing. I feel like there's a very steep learning curve to fly fishing. And if you don't have a mentor, I mean, I watched, oh my gosh, 1 million hours of YouTube videos of how to like fly fish and tie knots, and I still can't tie a blood knot. Like it's not easy. I mean, I can do the fisherman's knot all day. I can worm dunk with the best of them. Give me a bobber and I'm great. But the whole fly fishing setup was cumbersome. Luckily for me, I have a good buddy who's a science teacher up the hallway, super into macro invertebrates, and he's the guy who would take me out and set me up and literally act as like a father figure, tying my knots for me and be like, hey man, try this one, here you go. So I was real lucky to have a mentor who I still fish with quite a bit. But these days I feel a lot more comfortable going out on my own, which is kind of cool. And I think that's just like, you got to put your hours in order to get that comfort zone going. Right around, I think everyone has a COVID story, right? Like everyone has this, like COVID was either really horrible or really like life-changing. And I experienced a little bit of both. But on the more positive side of things, I got to spend a lot of time outdoors with my kids because school was shut down. I was doing this teaching thing online, kind of like zooming in with kids who didn't have to have their cameras on, which was kind of crazy that you'd have 25, 26 eighth graders who didn't have to like actually be in front of the screen. Most of the kids were playing video games and making hot pockets, and there I am talking about John Adams and some of the most boring stuff that you could possibly have in eighth grade, but still had to go through those hoops. But just the amount of time alone, just getting outside during that COVID stuff was life-changing, to say the least. I think I exposed my kids to a lot more than most people. I think a lot of people, you know, politics aside, some people stayed in and some people went out. And a lot of people went out, if you look at the statistics behind, you know, the COVID outdoorsy movement. It did me some good, right? So this is about fishing with kids, but at the same time, my Instagram handle is ReWild Outdoors. And one of the things that I think is more personal to me is the idea of rewilding itself. Like there's a European version, it's even here in the United States a little bit, but rewilding is technically by definition, when you leave an area of a landscape alone and it grows back the way it should. I kind of take that into a more, I guess, human side of it, where I found myself going outdoors and feeling less stressed, less anxious. I only anecdotally, I think I could say that my kids, when they're outside, are less stressed and less anxious. So this whole ReWild Outdoors thing was born slightly before COVID came on in full effect. So I think November of 2019 is when I first started posting pictures to Instagram. And then, you know, fast forward a good couple months, and March of 2020, you're in a lockdown somewhere, which is just crazy. And I feel like a lot of my buddies that I fish with, they have kids about the same age. I felt like I was the mentor to them, and I honestly can claim I coached lacrosse, youth lacrosse, for several seasons. I would say I probably taught 7 or 8 of my kids' buddies how to bass fish, trout fish, attempt fly fishing. So just getting kids out in general. In my teaching profession, my buddy and I have run some classroom, I guess they're not really field trips, but we can call them field trips for the sake of explanation. But we've taken groups of kids fishing to a local pond where we set them up, you know, on just basically bass rods and throwing some Senkos around and hopefully catching some bass. And these are kids that, I mean, we have all sorts of kids, from kids who are super quiet, kids who are, you know, the varsity, you know, sports type, and everybody just kind of comes together and enjoys that time outdoors. And they're super excited when they catch a fish, even when they lose one. It's just the experience of going out. And I think that's one of the most important things, is to get people outdoors and let them kind of experience the feeling of, I don't know, maybe it's self-satisfaction or that relaxation that comes just from being outside. Moving on here. So early, I guess, oh my gosh, probably I started teaching in 2005-ish, and we didn't use MacBooks, we didn't use technology, we didn't use iPads. It was school, as you can probably remember school, where you just had a textbook, you took some notes. It was the old-fashioned way, but slowly creeped in the iPhone in 2007, and then you had iPad. And I would say around 2007, 8, and 9, teaching probably changed forever. But at the same time, I think children probably changed forever as well. One of the first books I ever picked up, probably a good 10 years ago, is it's highlighted here on my screen. It's by an author by the name of Richard Louv. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But he wrote a book called Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And this nature deficit disorder is something that he took notice of. Now, he's much more of a researcher than I am. I'm just an 8th grade history teacher who shows up and, you know, I'm in the teaching trenches, so to speak. But this guy did a lot of I guess you would say like psychological experiments and data points. And he realized that with screen time comes inside time, right? So that's the correlation. With more people being on screens, the less people are going outdoors. And like I mentioned, COVID kind of changed that. But as COVID's slowly going away, just an example from the other day, our summer has just started. My wife's a teacher, and we're all home. My kids are home now. I asked my oldest son, because he likes fishing for bass. I'm like, hey, let's go up to the pond up the road and, chuck around for some bass. No, I'm good. I'm like, well, what are you doing? And he's just scrolling away, watching YouTube, playing video, got the PS5 going. All that's fine. But I noticed if I don't push him, I don't know, maybe he has the interest, but he's just not motivated to go out and do these things. So there's this consequence that we have to these screens. Parenting wise, we have to like kind of figure out a way to not treat the screen as like, I don't, it's not a right. It is a privilege, but our society today has kind of taken it to the point where, I mean, I'm on Instagram, social media, but it's a balanced. I'm 41 years old, I think 42, somewhere in there. I lived half my life without a screen, which is kind of like an amazing, point in history. I didn't get a phone till I think I was 20 or 21 in college. So having that balance where when I get bored, I go do something. When I think kids get bored, they pick up a phone or PlayStation or whatever their gaming system is. So there's a big difference of the motivation to choose an activity to go outside, right? So I think that's one of the hard things about parenting these days. The scary side of this, which is what I see a lot. I mean, I've been teaching 8th grade 12 or 13 years, been in the teaching business 18 or 19 years. With screens has kind of come this depression syndrome, right? Like we get all these trainings on kids and how they're just not the same anymore. And you can see that Richard Louv, some of the things I highlighted here, it's anecdotal consequences include an uptick in anxiety, depression, obesity, because you're just not moving around as much, increased stress, focus issues, behavioral issues. You can break it down into male and females have more body issues. So social media has its pros and cons for sure. But one of the hard things here is, the motivation factor of how are we going to get off the screen and outside. And one of the things I tell my kids, including, I even tell myself this, because sometimes I fall down the rabbit hole of watching YouTube, is what I'm watching on the screen isn't my hobby unless I'm actually doing it, which is kind of like, I don't know. I watch a lot of magnet fishing videos, which I think is like fascinating to me. Like, who doesn't want to pull a revolver out of a bridge in some seedy area? But I don't do it. I just watch a lot of videos about it, right? So you got to watch that you don't fall into the trap of getting stuck in your screen, technically. So one of the things that I have kind of taken into practice over the years is this whole stream time, not screen time thing on my Instagram. I sometimes use that hashtag, something similar to that, but there are some shocking figures that I've been given over the years. And of course, I looked a few of these up as well, but like in the teaching business, it's this double-edged sword of like, here's your iPad kid, here's your laptop kid, and all of your textbooks are online, but we really don't want to see you like exceed screen time limits. And I'm like, how is that even possible? So schools are partly just as guilty as this, but like there is a little difference between educational learning that's on a screen versus, playing games and scrolling through TikTok and Instagram and all the fun stuff. But if you look here, I have kids that fall into that 11 to 14 hour range and they're on a screen 9 hours a day. And I would absolutely say that is correct, which is just like shocking to me. My kids go to like sports camps, but when they get home, I don't know, they're tired and they pop on their screens, but it goes down a little bit once you hit high school. But I would even say adults are in the same boat these days. I don't even want to look at what my screen time, counter is on the iPhone. It would be kind of embarrassing to have this conversation. But I will say I was up at 7 a.m. and fishing this morning. So there's that balance of how I can get out versus how much time I'm spending, on my own phone. So there's this concept of passive screen time and active screen time, right? So that this passive screen time stuff is just consumption. And that's what I feel like my children are constantly doing. That's the YouTube, that's the TikTok, that's the Instagram Reels. And again, I do a little of the same, but it's not active screen time. Like if they're playing a video game, which isn't necessarily all that better, but it is a different type of consumption. One of the things I notice with my youngest is if he is online like for a while on a small screen, not like a big screen playing a video game, he'll get some pretty bad headaches, right? And that'll shut him down, which is kind of scary. Like he gets like migraines. Like I didn't know like 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds could get migraines, but he absolutely does. And then he gets angry. Like if I say, hey, we're going to cut it out soon, I get a moan or a groan, and sometimes it turns into a parental argument, which I think parenting these days is either you can take an easy route and say, all right, here you go, or you can kind of fight it a little bit and say, let's play a game, or let's go outside, let's ride bikes. And that's another thing about, I live in suburbia. I don't see a lot of kids playing outdoors. No one's in their driveways shooting hoops. COVID was a little different with more people being out, but even going up to the local pond, I don't see as many kids as I used to, especially during the summer. So it's kind of, you really have to parent hard these days to get these kids going. And hopefully once you do get them out, you catch a fish or they just enjoy their time. And that's where that motivation comes from. You want to keep coming back. You want to keep going outside. So this whole fishing thing with kids, I had to learn this kind of the hard way. And one of the things I realized is that this fishing stuff, or even going on a hike or camping, it's not really you got to throw out all the ideals that you have as a dad about like how this is going to go. And one of the things that I think I learned to grasp earlier are some of these bullet points that I threw on the screen here. It's connection over catching, right? So what are you connecting to? And I think it's more of a connection to myself. I think about how I am as a person. When I'm on the water, the only thing really moving is, obviously my hand movements, but the water is pretty much the only thing moving. And my mind is so focused in on what fly I should use, or just observing the water. Did I just see a fish rise? You're hearing splashes. So that whole connection, like you really turn yourself onto what matters when you step outside, right? But if you're going with your children, this whole connection to each other it's priceless. And I wish I could go back to my kids being 5 or 6 years old and them asking me to tie the knots for them again. My oldest can do it. My youngest is just about there, but they become more independent as they get older. But that whole time outdoors and connecting, this is a picture up on the screen. That's a picture of us during COVID, because that was just like remarkable days. We would just walk down a trail and just, all right, let's fish this hole and see how it goes. But we connected so much during that time. It's something I'll never forget. And I hopefully, as they get older, they'll never forget it too. Connection to nature. I think fishermen, hunters alike, outdoorsmen in general, we are conservationists through and through. I think a lot of what we do, whether it's license sales, and we fund, our state's efforts to basically conserve nature. I became a catch and release fisherman over the last few years. Not to knock my local waters, it is class 1, which Trout Roots app says it's pretty darn good, and it is in sections. But I fish in an urban area, and I'll be honest, I don't want to eat the fish that come out of there sometimes, even though they're beautiful. typically I'll catch, little stocky rainbows, occasionally a brown trout. I'm pretty sure I caught a nice big holdover rainbow, 2 or 3 weeks ago, give or take. But they're rare. I know what I'm fishing for, and my water comes with a consumption advisory, which is, unfortunate, but that's the way it goes. I don't have the luxury of finding pristine water unless I drive a minimum of an hour. But again, I'm concerned about that. So when I go fishing, this whole connection to nature thing, like I pick up a whole lot of trash that I see lying around, which I encourage my children to do as well. So even if I don't catch anything, I cleaned up a whole bunch of styrofoam the other day, bottles and cans down in the local area, more in the urban section that I fish. But again, I do this because I care about the water that I'm fishing in. This is, you create that connection. And this whole thing about common values, I think feeds into the whole fisherman mentality as well. Whether you catch and release, I mean, I'll keep a few fish, we'll put them on the grill or the smoker. But fishermen in general, I think, share common values. I think we appreciate, at least I do, seeing other people out in the water. And I feel like I'm pretty friendly. I'm like, hey, how you doing? Catching anything? And, some guys will tell you the truth and some guys won't. I think that's kind of the name of the game. But we kind of recognize each other as having this common connection to what we're doing. And I think if we can get children out doing that, and kind of hitting those 4 ideas, I think the whole fishing thing will grow with them, with that connection. My favorite, it's not really a favorite lesson, but a hard lesson I learned with my kids at a very young age was fishing the local gun club trout derby, right? Like, so you go to the fishing contest, they put way more trout that could ever actually be sustained in a small body of water, but it's all for the sake of kids catching fish. And it's absolutely amazing. And I will be upfront with you. I have lost my patience in the early days of like, oh my gosh, you're crossing lines and, this and that. And I've seen some worse examples, so I feel better saying that. But at the same time, I wish I had the courage to walk up to these dads and say, hey man, this isn't your fishing trip, right? Like that's one of the hardest lessons I learned about fishing with kids is I don't even bring my fishing rod anymore. I'll bring my rod maybe if I'm going with my oldest, but with my youngest, I'm in it for him. I'm not really in it for me. So knowing that it is not your fishing trip is extremely important, because if you think you're going to fish, you are absolutely going to lose your patience with a child, whether it's your own or someone you're fishing with. And that's not going to help them become fishermen, because they're going to associate that as probably a bad time. Another thing is you got to keep the equipment simple. I bought my kids, and I think it's an Echo makes, it's called the Echo Gecko fly rod. It's fantastic. I think it's only a 7-footer, so it's a lot easier, for them to cast. But spinning rods, like if you're just looking to catch a fish, I think just a spinning rod's going to do the trick. Fly fishing is a whole different animal in terms of the learning curve. We started off with, the Spider-Man push button reels, which always get knotted up in that closed bait cast system. Those were a little bit of a mess, but if you're taking kids fishing, make sure your equipment is functional and it's simple and easy to use. And like I said, leave your rod at home. Not always. I mean, you got to kind of gauge who you're with and how well your kids fish, but put the time in for them, not necessarily for yourself. You can, like I've been doing, waking up early in the morning, getting out, at the crack of dawn without the kids is kind of, my time, not necessarily for them. So one of the things, having a 14-year-old, but having him start fishing probably at the age of like 2 or 3 when he could tag along with me, is you got to consider like where you're taking them and what you're doing. And I think that's one thing the Trout Roots app will help with which I'll highlight at the end is access points. So where you're going, I hope it's like if you're doing some fly fishing with a kid and they're younger, wading always helps, but like getting a 4 or 5-year-old to wade and stay upright with a fly rod is not always easy, and keeping them dry. So that whole idea of fly fishing versus spin fishing, In my opinion, not one is better than the other. It's whatever you can get in the hands of a child, please do so, right? So, but with older kids, I feel like my son, until he was about 11 or 12, really didn't get the mechanics down of a fly rod until about the age of 12, if I had to put a number on it. Of course, you can start earlier and practice a heck of a lot more, but we're busy. He plays a few sports, and I'm teaching and working. So getting out and practicing wasn't always. It's like archery, you know what I mean? You got to put your time in. But with the spinning rod, a lot easier. Flip the bail, let it go, and see what you end up with. I think my oldest and even my youngest, if I had to kind of ask them, I feel like they favor bass fishing, which drives me nuts. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate bass fishing. I'll do it probably in a week or so when the water warms up around here. And I'm just not good with bass poppers on a fly rod yet, but it's something I hope to try, or even throw in some like deeper clouser minnows for smallmouth bass down the Delaware River, not too far. But getting kids to target a species that is a little bit more catchable, right? Panfish on the fly is absolutely awesome on a 4-weight. Again, the local gun club has a stock trout pond that it's aerated, but then there's the back pond that gets all weedy and gross and no one goes back there. We will go back there and just tie on. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be woolly buggers. It could be anything, it's the big old bulky sulfur fly. Anything that lays on top, those sunnies are going to absolutely devour. And that is a whole lot of fun on a real light 4-weight. And I think kids would get a kick out of that. So make sure you're targeting a species of fish that, I mean, it's not always about catching the fish, but that's the reward. That's the payoff. And if you think about how kids think today with their phones, everything's almost instant these days. If they want something, if they want to see something, they can watch it, they can get to it. So that gratification of actually catching something is huge. And then of course, keep it fun. I remember, kind of losing my patience when my kids were like stepping in the water, throwing rocks. They still do that, which I think is like absolutely awesome these days. Like they'll go out and like, they'll start, they're brothers and they're like their own worst best friends. They'll skip rocks and who can do it the furthest. And then it turns into an argument, but let them get wet, let them get dirty, let them throw rocks. And then my youngest, he's all about the snacks. So make sure you're packing something to eat for these kids, because if you plan on spending an hour, 2, 3 hours on the water, especially like if you have a boat and you're on a lake or something, you need some pretty good snacks, right? So again, I don't know which ones you're going to prefer, but kids enjoy eating. So do I. I mean, who doesn't, right? All right. Here's some of those benefits. And again, there's a picture from maybe a little after COVID, but there's a bass rod for you, taking the kid out. Probably looks like a Ned rig. When in doubt, always go with the Ned rig. The idea of getting, I would even say this applies to adults as well, because I feel like I'm an anxious person. I'm high energy. I'm stressed out at times, and the outdoors, especially fishing, is just a really awesome experience in terms of slowing down. And I think a lot of us can probably relate to the fact that we do a lot. Even if you leave work doesn't leave you anymore because of these things. Like it's constantly with you. But in regards to kids, the whole like ADD, ADHD thing, I see this all the time in school. If I give my students just a little bit of outside time, now obviously I can't fish on my school's campus, but I'm the teacher who will take 5 minutes out of my class time to just do a loop on the outskirts of the parking lot, which kind of takes us underneath some sycamore trees and a pine tree here and there. Calms them down. Like people just enjoy the outdoors. It's absolutely natural for us to be there. It's again, the research would suggest it's not a cure-all for ADD or ADHD, but it alleviates, some of the symptoms of that attention deficit. Stress reduction. I think a lot of us step outside. Like if I'm having a hard day, I can totally relate to the idea of just sometimes when I'm fishing, I find myself just staring off at the water and kind of having I call it a moment, if you will, In the more meditative side of things, that's called like a sit spot. I'm not going to go down that road right now, but sit spots have been around for thousands of years. It's kind of an old concept of like literally going outside and sitting there and just feeling the connection around you. I think kids would benefit from that. I do a lot of like my own, I take my classes outside underneath those trees I was talking about. And if we're working on our laptops, or if we're doing a reading, we can certainly do that reading outside. And there's a lot to be said about just kind of being outdoors and kind of blending a little bit of like the educational world with getting outdoors as well. Movement, again, movement is kind of big. Like you're walking through water, you're getting your kids, down these tight little trails. My kids always get ticked off at me when I'm taking them on deer trails that aren't really trails. We're just kind of cutting through the woods. But I can do that now that they're a little bit older. But again, the whole idea of being stuck on the couch watching screens isn't really helping kids out with their movement these days. And again, even adults. So again, this applies to the best of both worlds. There's a lot of responsibility when it comes to fishing. I think I remember, my gosh, my kid was probably 3 or 4. And he asked me if the fish was going to wake up, and that was like 3 trout on a stringer. And I'm like, no, they're not going to wake up. So that's a tough call. Like that's a tough way to kind of explain that to a child. That whole concept of death is very realistic when either you fish or hunt or whatever you choose to do outdoors. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with it, how you handle the fish. In the trout fishing world, I posted a pic, I think a week or so ago, of just a release video. And, I know my hand was wet, but there's always somebody out there questioning, like, did you take the slime off that fish? It's going to die the way you released it. So there is a lot of responsibility to fishing. If you're letting your kids, tie on their own hooks, I mean, nobody wants a barbed hook through their finger. Nobody wants to make an errant cast with a fly rod and end up with a piece of lip jewelry or face jewelry, which happens. So the kids, have to have some of that responsibility and respect that, life is fragile and you might get hurt. So that teaches a lot as well. There's a lot of wonder and creativity that come with fishing. I think if you just get the kids outdoors, and I've seen this with my own children, it's not always about fishing. Sometimes they're playing in the mud. Sometimes they're stacking rocks. My oldest likes to collect like quartz crystals. My windowsills are filled with them. Occasionally, I don't know if you find yourselves doing this, but I don't know how often I'm looking in the water and I'm looking for like arrowheads or fossils or just something that I can touch and take home with me besides the fish, which is remarkable. Social connection, fishing's a community. When I got my kids to go fishing, a lot of their buddies wanted to go too. And I think that's a nice outlet for kids, especially as they get older. I mean, my son will be 15 in a few months, and that's a little nerve-wracking for me as a dad, especially as some of his buddies are now, will turn 16 and they start driving. Man, I hope they choose to go fishing over some of other activities that they can get into. So I think fishing will provide them with an outlet or an alternative to possibly making some bad decisions. But again, teenagers, they do those sorts of things and hopefully they can learn from them. But I can clearly remember being in like my later years of college where some of the guys wanted to go out the night before. And I would actually be like, nope, going fishing in the morning. And I would call it quits a little bit early and not go out till 2, 3 a.m. like you would do in your younger days. But that whole social connection thing of fishing with friends is extremely important, because even though our devices, whether gaming or our phones, they're isolators. They might say they're connecting us to other people, but truthfully, people are becoming more isolated these days. If you factor in all of these things together, the overall emotional well-being of adults and children alike will just simply benefit from the outdoors. And I think that's huge these days. Again, I'm not a doctor, not a professional in this, but there's a lot of there's a lot of data out there on depression being on the rise, and that's a very scary factor, especially for someone like myself. I dealt with depression and anxiety, and I think what helped me, besides proper counseling, was the outdoors, and I'll stand by that time and time again. And I think that's a huge benefit. And I think more children should be, or more parents should be aware of that. And just even going for walks, it doesn't matter if you're going fishing, but getting kids outdoors would be a huge benefit to that. All right. Some of the things that I found myself using on the Trout Roots app, and I hope I can link this up in a minute here, but Pro Access is, when I first started messing with it, it was like eye-opening about how much around me is fishable. And I didn't quite understand that. I mean, I grew up on the same creek where I lived. I just live a little further away from it now. But I didn't know how much more water and access was available to me on a stretch of water that I've fished, I mean, again, probably for 30 some years. It's remarkable. And then, I mean, I'll admit this too, when I was sitting at work and you get those few minutes of daydreaming, I'll pop on the app and I'm like, wow, there is a gold trout stream 5 minutes from my place of employment. So I found myself bringing the fly rod to work, and yeah, again, just on the way home, trying to figure out where to go. The Trout Roots app has the parking features. It shows you where to go, and a lot of times those are like public parks or access points. So I think that's been a huge benefit over the last couple months since I started using it. So public access is a huge feature. Especially if you're new to the game. I think, like I said, that whole mentor idea before is crucial. If you have somebody, like if you have experience and you're taking your kids fishing, but there's a lot of people that might not have fishing experience who are going to take their kids fishing. And to them, again, going back, start with easy equipment, and then using Trout Roots, you can find those letter P, the parking symbols, that will tell you exactly where to go. And what I have found is I cross-reference. If you zoom out a little bit, and I can show you that in a second, a lot of these places are public parks, especially by me on, like I said, the busy end of Pennsylvania. A lot of these access points are within parks. So it kind of shows you these big areas of like shaded green. But I think once you get that narrowed down, one of the things that I think is super helpful is the classification system, whether it's gold, class 1, class 2, or class 3. I've experimented with all of these classifications. There's some water just north of me that says it's class 3, and I ended up with an 8-inch wild brown trout. Go figure. I wouldn't say there's a lot of wild brown trout in there at all, because it looked shallow and only in little pools. But again, they're there. It's just not stocked. It's probably not as popular as the other classifications, but it allows you to kind of say, hey, I'm gonna try this out today. I'm gonna see what this has. And you go where I have this tendency to try to, I don't know, Indiana Jones. Like, I'm a history teacher. I started off as an archaeology major, and I kind of switched gears a little bit, but I have this sense of like exploration to me that I enjoyed quite a bit. So Trout Roots has kind of opened that up for me a little bit in terms of like, oh, I didn't know this was a fishable body of water. I'm going to take a little ride and see what happens. And then another one's the most popular toggle, which I can highlight in a minute once I open this thing up here after I get done sharing this. But the most popular toggle, if you hit it, what I've noticed is it eliminates a lot of the choices around my area, but it does highlight, well, the spots that you're probably going to catch a really nice fish. So I think that's a big feature for me. There's an area of I'll throw out there, it's called the Salkin Creek. It's from my work. It's only a few minutes away. And that I went right to the most popular section as it was highlighted on the map. And it was a good day. So that worked out great on my end of things. If you bear with me for a second here, I'm going to pop this off and I'm going to share the phone and kind of give you a rundown of what that would look like. Give me a second. That's my cable. Something open that. There we go. There's Trout Roots.
Looking perfect.
Thank you. You see the Delaware River. So I'm going to hit call it the little aim. What would we call that? Little aimer. There we go. So that's where I'm currently sitting. Now you'll see some blue around here. Those are some local ponds, but I'm going to zoom out quite a bit. And here I am. I'm just north of a little city called Easton. Sits right on the Delaware River. If you're familiar with this area of Pennsylvania, the Delaware River is pretty well known for its shad. And then we get a decent schoolie striper run coming through here, which I've caught 2 over the last week, which has been kind of fun on some jerk baits down there. Have not been successful on a fly rod in the Delaware River in terms of catching striped bass, but I got all summer. All right. So here we see a lot of parking symbols right here. I'm going to zoom, find my bridge. We'll just stick to this area. So there's the Bushkill Creek. I can click on that. It tells me it's class 1. Oh, hold on here. Let's go back. There we go. Class 1 top rated water. And if you fish some of the sections where I have been or where I've even grown up, you would be like, this is seriously class 1 water. I mean, it flows next to buildings. It changes directions. You're standing on a hubcap. There might be a hobo guy sleeping on the banks next to you asking if you caught anything, but it is fantastic fishing. And it's that is probably due to the efforts of, like I said, that whole idea of community and local fishermen sticking up for their water. Can't leave out Trout Unlimited for doing a lot of cleanups along the way and pushing back against some of the pollution. So again, if you're new to fishing, highly encourage you to join a local fishing group such as Trout Unlimited. They're around everywhere. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. Are Trout Roots is associated with Trout Unlimited? Oh, I think you're muted, and I put you on the spot. My apologies.
That'll do it. Oh, yep. I didn't want to interrupt you, but yeah, Trout Unlimited is actually one of our 3 main corporate sponsors. So we've done some really awesome work with them in terms of donations, but we've also been able to implement some of the work that they've done right within the app as well. So we've been able to implement some of their habitat projects, as well as around Earth Day. We were able to plug in some of the stream cleanup events that they were having around the country as well. So we're able to do some really cool work with them. And like you said, Brett, really great resource for new anglers or for old anglers as well. So.
Yeah. One of the things, I should be a little bit more active and involved, but I feel like, lacrosse season takes me here and there all throughout the summer, not my own lacrosse, but my kids. I don't know how to tie flies. Again, I'm only fly fishing 7-8 years now. Trout Unlimited has offered quite a few fly tying classes that I've taken them up on with my kids and I, doing both. They don't look great, but they work. They do well. If you go down to the filters button, I have everything kind of set up here. Because I don't really care if it says class 2 or 3. In my opinion, I'm going to try it out sometimes if I've never been there. That's the whole exploration thing. But if you click on the most popular function and you go back out, sometimes it does eliminate some of those sections, but you kind of have to scroll around and zoom in on places to kind of find some of those more popular sections, which is kind of neat. But again, I only do that if I'm in a new area. I think I haven't done this yet because my summer break, summer vacation has just started. But when we do our road trips, we're going to be heading down to North Carolina, the Outer Banks, where I hope to do some surf fishing. But along the way, I would love to open this thing up. And that's one of the things Trout Roots Pro is going to be awesome with is if I'm in the middle of, I don't know, North Carolina, and we decide to stay somewhere else, I can access and find some trout fishing water. So I'm taking the long way to the Outer Banks. I haven't told my wife that. We're going to leave like a day or two early, and either car camp or do something along the way. But again, Trout Roots will set you up with access to, I think it's 48 states. I think you guys.
We got the lower 48. I was just putting North Carolina to use a couple of weeks ago, so the maps are solid down in North Carolina for you for whenever.
Very cool. I'd like to I think, take the little bit of a Western route and maybe go through Asheville or somewhere near that area. So
Nice. Yeah, it was we were down in Brevard for the for one of the film festival stops a few weeks ago.
Cool.
So got some good fishing in the park there around Brevard area, and some real good fishing. So I would definitely recommend taking the long way.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be another, just the idea of like, I'm trying to think, like last summer, I did not have this app. I fished outside of Denver, a little west and a little south. And the only way I knew where to go was pop in the fly shops, which I think is kind of cool. If you look down here, there's a fly shops toggle on the Trout Roots app. And if I had that, I mean, I wouldn't, you can Google stuff and look it up, but like, popping in the fly shops is still a good idea to, support your local business. But at the same time, I usually find that these guys will point me in the relative right direction, right? I mean, I'm a Pennsylvania guy popping into Colorado, so they're not always sharing the best spots, but it helps a little bit when you pop in and say hello and maybe buy a hat or a sticker and a couple of flies.
Yeah.
But again,
You can go into the fly shop, having done your research, and sound like you know what you're talking about.
That's true too.
Trout Routes app, right?
Yeah, heck yeah, man. So again, having the fly shop access button is huge. There's a shop not too far away from here. I think it's called the Pocono Fly Shop. I never knew it existed. And that popped up on here, which I thought was kind of cool. So again, just having access to information, especially if you're new and not like I've been fishing 7 or 8 years on the fly rod. Knowing where to go is huge, but also knowing that you have more access than you think you do is a huge benefit to anybody that's going to get into the fishing game, especially if you're new.
Totally. Awesome. Well, Brett, I want to make sure we have some time for some quick questions and things like that here. So
yeah, I would love it.
Anything else? Let's jump into a couple questions. So first one here is how has Trout Routes made it easier getting on the water with kids? Like if you had to give one kind of succinct way that you think is the easiest way for people to get started getting kids on the water with Trout Routes, what would you have to say that feature or tool is?
That is for me the access points, the little parking symbols. I think when you show up to the public park, because a lot of them do align to public parks, a lot of those areas are fishable because the embankments either have been mowed down. You're not bushwhacking, so to speak, to get into a tight place to fish for trout. So I think just getting to those parking spots gives you a destination to get to where you're not just guessing and driving around and saying, this looks good, let's try here.
Right on. Awesome. Next one is how do you create those natural, long-lasting moments for kids when they're outdoors?
For me, it's remembering that this is not your fishing trip. This is a moment that's, I don't know, it's a teachable moment. Like you're not out there for me, it's not about catching fish. It's making sure my kids know how to do an activity if I weren't around or when they're older, so they have an outlet. So it's, again, just slow down, calm down. It's not about catching the fish. It's about spending the time with your kids and just making sure that you're calm, you're patient, and you're allowing them to experience, the natural beauty that fishing has to offer. I think fishermen or hunters, just outdoorsy people in general, we're really lucky with the amount of scenery that we can take in. And I'll be honest, I hang on to it. I'm sure, you could probably relate, like you visualize certain places that you've been, you're like, man, that place was awesome.
Yep, absolutely. Awesome. And last one here for you. Looks like we got one other one. Well, it looks like we just have another person that they wanted to say thank you. It looks like they're going to be taking their grandkids to a stock trout pond next month, and they're super excited, and
Awesome.
they know their grandson will definitely be throwing some rocks. So, but
Perfect.
Really appreciated your time tonight. And so the last question here is how do you make sure that with those kind of takeaways that those kids are able to, how do you kind of wrap that up with kids at the end of taking kids outdoors, whether it's be your students or your own kids,
Sure.
making sure that they are kind of having those takeaways from being outdoors?
I think conversation is extremely important. Whether you're a teacher or you have to ask questions and engage with the kids. And even when I take my own children out, I'm like, man, hey, how'd you guys like? What'd you like about today? What was the best part of today? I feel like a lot of, and this is like maybe my teacher sense going off. If you ask a question that only requires a yes or no response, that's all the kid's going to give you. So if you ask them questions that are elaborative, what was the best part about the day? That you can't answer that with a yes or no. So ask those questions that kind of force the kids to kind of be a little bit more elaborative.
Awesome. Awesome, Brett. Well, we really want to say once again, thank you so much for your time tonight. This was a really awesome presentation and a really great way to continue to kind of steamroll our Trout Routes Masterclass program. Really
I appreciate the offer.
So
thanks for having me, man.
yep. Awesome. Well, you
Talk to you
have a
soon.
great night, and thank you everybody for joining us.
Take care.